After 15 episodes packed to the brim with action figures recorded across 3 years, we conclude our look back on the Doctor Who Classic Series action figures released by Character Options. This episode we cover the releases of 2020, being mostly B&M Exclusive collector sets, seeing the series expand out to feature new classic companions, unit soldiers, and you guessed it, even more Daleks. I've decided that the series will end on the final release of 2020, otherwise this series isn't particularly a look back on previous releases and more a looking at the current releases that have been released presently. But who knows, maybe in years to come I may look back and document the releases of 2021 onwards, with memories of that time collecting, very much like how I have done for the previous 16 parts. So for one final time, ending out on a 1 hour special, sit back, grab yourself a cuppa, and I hope you enjoy Doctor Who, the Classic Series action figures, a history. Next up, we have the most exciting release of the B&M line of 2020. It is the Companions of the Fourth Doctor collector set, and one that, looking back, I still can't quite believe that we have as a part of our collection. This set does, of course, rather brilliantly see the release of Sarah Jane Smith from Genesis of the Daleks and Revenge of the Cybermen, Mary Tam as Romana 1 from the Pirate Planet from the Key to Time season, and of course Lala Ward as Romana 2 from Destiny of the Daleks. All three of these figures feature brand new head sculpts that have never been seen before as a part of the classic series. And following exactly the same format to the Harry Sullivan figure, of course we have the reuse of bodies that have been previously released as a part of the Character Options line, however with a brand new head stuck on top, meaning that for the most part some of these costumes are a little bit questionable as for TV accuracy. At the same time, it is absolutely brilliant to be able to add these companions to the shelf, and as a result, nearly completing our line of Companions of the Fourth Doctor. Of course, the base figure for the Sarah Jane release from Season 12 is in fact the Martha Jones combat figure as seen throughout the Series 3 finale. Initially this figure was of course an all-black costume, however this time round has been painted green at the top to represent the jacket, and then at the very bottom we have the inclusion of the unusual looking combat trousers. To be honest, this is a figure that we've been expecting for a number of years. It is a very logical reuse because it is a very effective one. It does look a lot like Sarah Jane from the story, the only exception being, of course, the jacket is fastened and within the episode itself it is in fact open. And as for the likeness to Elizabeth Sladen, it is absolutely brilliant. Some of those features on the face are ever so slightly more emphasised, being ever so slightly cartoon. However, overall you can definitely tell who it is meant to be, and the actual sculpting of the hair as well is absolutely brilliant, featuring lots of different strands in there, capturing that bob that Sarah Jane does sport throughout her Fourth Doctor adventures. Next up we have Mary Tam as Romana 1, the least effective figure of the set. However, I don't care, because it means that we have a Romana 1 as a part of our collection, and at the end of the day, if you are that concerned about the costume, you can customise your own and you can make it as accurate as you want, which is something of course that Character Options can't do using pre-existing sculpts. The shirt blouse thing that Mary Tam does wear throughout the story in fact covers the entirety of the front of the costume, as well as featuring a lip at the very front, and it is in fact a rather ugly looking pink, much like this one. However, of course, this is an open jacket with a white shirt underneath, which isn't present throughout the actual story itself. They've decided to cut the paint application short on the arm to give the impression that the jacket does, of course, end at the top half of the arm itself. Again, this isn't particularly that effective. However, I don't really care that much. Then, of course, at the bottom we have these rather white trousers, as well as the shoes there. This sculpt was also used for the Yasmin Khan figure, also released as a part of the B&M series, and that, of course, was originally a woman from Primeval. As for the actual likeness to Mary Tam, again, it is absolutely brilliant, although I don't think that this head 100% fits the body. I think the neck is ever so slightly quite long. However, the actual likeness itself, the paint application is very sharp. I love the detailing of the makeup around the eyes, and of course the lips are a lovely purpley colour to represent the makeup once again, and the skin tone is ever so slightly darker compared to that of Sarah Jane. A very similar complement to that of the Sarah Jane figure, in fact, is that the hair is absolutely phenomenal. We have loads of different strands in there, there, representing all the different curls, and an ever so slight wash has been applied over the top of this to bring out some of those details. However, much like how I mentioned within the review, I think it would have been nice to have an ever so slightly thicker wash because it is rather bland, and a slightly more vibrant wash may have brought out those details a bit more. And then the third figure of the set is Lala Ward as Romana 2 from Destiny of the Daleks, and is quite frankly one of my personal favourite Doctor Who action figures that has been released over the past few years. I absolutely love it, and to be honest, I could actually imagine this figure being released as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive series, and it wouldn't have really looked out of place. Of course, the base figure is in fact a Sarah Jane from the Sarah Jane spin-off line of action figures. It's one that wasn't even in my contemplation for this figure, however it is very effective. We have a brand new scarf piece that has been applied, which is much thinner and more flexible compared to the Destiny of the Daleks and City of Death 4th Doctor scarf, and then of course we have the entirety of the body pretty much being painted pink, and a highlight added over the top of this in a burgundy design to represent the lapels as well as the buttons, and of course a few pockets here and there. There is a number of issues, the likes of at the very back here, we have this unusual sort of belt section that isn't present on the Destiny of the Daleks Romana coat, and likewise this little windbreak thing at the very top and the cuffs of the jacket, all of which weren't present. However, it's something that you get from using pre-existing sculpts. The legs are fairly effective. Of course, you have the boots in there, which are once again a rather plummy colour. And as for the likeness to Lala Ward, absolutely love it. It is definitely undeniably Lala Ward. Of course, the initial sculpt was a little bit more effective than this one. The paint that has been applied over the top of this has meant that some of that detailing has been lost, but you can definitely tell who it's meant to be. A rather similar thing to that of the Sarah Jane figure, where it does look ever so slightly cartoon. Those vibrant lips as well as the very wide eyes again look a bit like Lala Ward but have been ever so slightly exaggerated, and we do also have a wash that has been applied over the hair to bring out some of those additional strands of detail. The only complaint is of course that when you take off the scarf and look underneath, we have all that mess going on, which let's not look at that because it is an absolute disaster, but hey, I don't care because the figure itself looks incredible when you first look at it, and it's just when you start looking closer that there is a few flaws here and there. And of course, I would be letting you all down and not doing this series properly if I didn't end off with a closing shot of Tom Baker as the 4th Doctor, alongside all of his classic series companions, as well as of course the Barry Newbury Tardis there in the background as well. It's absolutely brilliant to think that all these years later, in 2020, after thinking for many, many years that we were never going to see any more classic series Doctor Who action figures, we're only going to see stuff that we've seen already re-released. However, here we are in 2020, at the current time of filming, with 3 brand new characters added to the shelf, very nearly completing all of the companions of the 4th Doctor. For argument's sake, you also need to add in Nessa, Tegan and Adric, but to be honest, I class those as 5th Doctor companions, and conveniently, that is a Tardis team of 3 characters. I imagine that character options will be getting their money's worth from them, so no doubt this is only the first time that we've seen Sarah Jane and both of the Romanas, and no doubt we will have further variants of their costumes in the future. I imagine that a suited variation of Harry is not too far off, maybe Pyramids of Mars version of Sarah Jane using the Gelth woman body, maybe even Victorian Leela once again using the Gelth woman body, and of course Jago and Lightfoot, that would be lovely, maybe using the Victorian version of the 11th Doctor from the Snowmen. It's potential for this line to grow in the future, and it's very exciting indeed. Second triple pack of the summer 2020 B&M exclusive line is the Unit 1971 collector set, because yes, the excitement isn't over just yet as we add 2 more brand new characters to the shelf. Of course, this set does feature yet another re-release of the Brigadier as portrayed by Nicholas Courtney. This time round we have a direct reuse of the Claws of Axos variation, including the Bearer sculpted head. This is very similar to the original release, however it does feature a number of paint application changes, most notably the hat, the shoulder pads and the elbow pads being ever so slightly more green, also a colour change on the gloves, as well as the trousers are now an ever so slightly more vibrant green with a wash applied over the top of them, and other than that there's not really too much to talk about. On a positive note, the likeness and the paint application upper compared to the one as seen from the 1970s set a number of years ago, which was very blocky and thick in paint application, this is a lot sharper. However, moving on to the more exciting figures of the set, we have Sergeant Benton as portrayed by John Levine, alongside Captain Mike Yates as portrayed by Richard Franklin. Wow. I still can't believe it, once again, much like Romana and Sarah Jane, that we actually have these figures to add to the shelf. Of course, the most obvious thing to get out of the way first is that both of these figures use exactly the same base, which is of course the Brigadier figure. Once again, PVC piece has been added over the top of the chest section, which is a brand new sculpt. It features these rather padded block sections, as well as a number of details around the jacket itself, rather excellently painted with a wash applied over the top of this. There is even some subtle changes between the two costumes. For example, these bag and belt sections on Sergeant Benton here are ever so slightly darker compared to the one as seen on Mike Yates, and equally on the shoulder pads as well as on the arm pieces we also have an ever so slight variation within the costume. So we have a few arrows that have been used on Sergeant Benton there, which is absent on Captain Mike Yates, to of course represent the rank that they hold within the Unified Intelligence Task Force. Next up we do of course have the head sculpts, which are absolutely excellent. I think that Sergeant Benton in particular, of course we have the beret, but all three figures have an ever so slight variation on the beret sculpt, just to make them ever so slightly different. We also have the unit badge there of course on the front, an excellent likeness to that of John Levine, looking rather worried, some rather sharp paint application around the eyes, looking very natural. And then of course you have Captain Mike Yates in there as well, who equally looks absolutely brilliant, never so slightly paler tone on the skin, as well as a rather yellowy style of paint application on the hair. And of course they do also feature these rather large gun accessories, which I do believe were originally released as a part of the Primeval series and are modern day guns, so don't really make sense to be packaged alongside them. However, I suppose they look alright on display, and the part that they're about to fight Axons and Gel Guards and whatever else that unit used to fight within the 1970s. In a very similar way to that of the companions of the 4th Doctor collector set, the release of the Unit 1971 set fills a few spaces on the shelf that Doctor Who Classic Series action figure collectors have wanted for so long. So that will sales in previous years, without a doubt we wouldn't have seen these figures added to our collection. And of course something that I've not mentioned in this video as of yet is that the 2020 summer collection wasn't only exclusive to B&M stores in the UK. If you were a fan in America, Australia and New Zealand, there was in fact a number of stores in those countries that were selling these sets to fans overseas, which is a great opportunity, being that these sets were more accessible than ever. However, I do believe that they were ever so slightly more expensive compared to the currency in the UK. And with that, that does of course conclude the B&M Exclusive 2020 Summer Collection. Overall, an absolutely brilliant set of Classic Series action figures, seeing the return of Classic Series Daleks, which were long awaited by many, of course our traditional by now Tardis exterior variant, as well as most excitingly, brand new head sculpts to add to the shelf of characters that we wanted to add to the line for so long, including 3 4th Doctor companions, as well as 2 members of Unit, and of course a variant of the 2nd Doctor and the Brigadier. Overall, this is without a doubt probably the strongest set of B&M exclusive action figures that we have seen so far, and definitely up the stakes of what we are going to see next as a part of this series. Very much like how I did say with the 2019 B&M collector sets, because this episode has in fact been filmed over the period of 1 year, at the current time of filming, these figures are in fact brand new. So now I hand over to my future self, perhaps in 2021 or late 2020, to be taking a look at, no doubt, whatever comes next after this. Normally I decide to film an ending section like it is the end of the series, however I've now filmed that section about 3 times over the past year or so, and then they just release more and more, which is absolutely brilliant. However, at the same time, a tad annoying when it comes to editing. So yes, I hand over to you now, future Ben. I must admit, when I was updating this series to cover the B&M exclusive releases of 2020, I didn't quite expect to be returning once again so soon to take a look at a rather exciting yet unexpected Dalek 2-pack in a rather similar style to the History of the Daleks collector sets, covering a form of Dalek that we've wanted to see as a part of the line for many years. It is of course the Jungles of Makkanos collector set at a recommended retail of £24.99, which was exclusive to the Couch Options website and is of course limited edition. Now these Daleks did feature very briefly within the chase for around 3 seconds. However, of course Doctor Who fans will also know this colour scheme of Dalek more obviously from the Peter Cushing movies. This set is one that did of course receive a lot of attention from Doctor Who fans, and for good reason, because they look absolutely brilliant. As you would expect by now within this series, of course the Dalek sculpt is exactly the same to usual. It is of course using the previously released Dalek Invasion of Earth Dalek. However, this time round we have a much more vibrant colour scheme, which is very eye-catching and definitely stands out on the shelf. Of course the main updates do of course include this lighter blue plastic that has been used for the sculpt of the bumper fender, as well as much more vibrant colours on the hemispheres, the dome, and of course the midsection of gold. Comparing this to the previously released MOVIE Dalek from the chase as a part of the Sound Effects Daleks range Wave 2, of course we have a very similar colour scheme here. However, this time round on the 2020 version, it has been updated rather considerably to be more vibrant and definitely making the colours pop. This one almost seems to be an ever so slightly toned down variation. We also have the inclusion of the standard Dalek gun, as opposed to the specific 60s design, as well as a paint application of the lighter bluey silver seen on the manipulator arm, something of which that is also present on the skirt of the Dalek, as well as around the midsection, which again wasn't present on the initial release, being of course the standard 60s silver. One of the most eye-catching things about the MOVIE Daleks, but also these Daleks compared to the previous releases, is that for the first time in quite a number of years, we have the implementation of a brand new sculpt on the dome lights, as these have now been replaced with a rather large, almost jam jar-like dome, which has been recreated using a transparent red plastic. There is also a series of delves and grooves which have been sculpted into this to give the general appearance of the dome light being ridged, definitely setting this Dalek apart from all of the others on the shelf, but also giving the general appearance of this Dalek being unmistakably a MOVIE Dalek. And of course, one of the additional benefits of having two virtually identical Daleks means that this collector set is the perfect opportunity to army build. And let's face it, who wouldn't want to army build these Daleks? I absolutely love the colour scheme, I love the inclusion of the light blue fender, and of course the brand new dome lights are absolutely brilliant and make these Daleks unmistakably MOVIE Daleks, or guest Daleks I suppose, from the chase. I really do love this design, and it's great to have them along the shelf, and I, like many other fans, were very happy to see them released. However, of course the main question is now, are we going to see more Couch Options online exclusives after the success and popularity of this one? Who knows? Only the future will tell. 2020 wasn't quite done with B&M exclusive action figure collector sets just yet, as late September into October 2020 seen the release of a second wave of B&M exclusive collector sets, using some rather similar action figures to that of the summer wave. So starting off, we have the continuation of the History of the Daleks series with two further 2-packs, starting off with History Collector Set 3 being from the 1965 story The Chase. Now, I do wonder if going in order with the History of the Daleks series was a good idea, because it certainly means towards the beginning we get so many silver and blue Daleks, and now we're finally edging into the 1970s, we're finally getting to see variety. This set does of course feature two Daleks that we've seen once again already within the series, but with some notable paint application changes. So first up we have the Chase Guard Dalek, and doesn't this one look ever so slightly familiar? And that is because we've already taken a look at this Dalek pretty much as a part of this episode. It is of course the Jungles of Makkanos Dalek, released again with a few minor changes. The colour scheme and colour palette overall is basically exactly the same. So we have that lighter blue which has been used, the lovely glossier darker blue on the hemispheres and dome, as well as that lovely yellowed section there in the very middle. The most notable difference is of course that this regular version now features the slimmer, more regular 60s base, which has been sculpted in a black coloured plastic. Sadly, there's no weather wash applied to this, much like History of the Daleks Set 1 and 2. I would have quite liked this to continue the theme of the series, just to add a bit more detail. Of course, on the Jungles of Makkanos variation, this was the large blue MOVIE Dalek fender, which has now been replaced. And of course the other iconic difference, this Dalek rather infamously sports the jam jar ear dome lights, which are incredible. These have now been removed on this version. It is the regular power of the Dalek sculpt, of course smaller, domed, with that yellow tint. The other very minor change is that the gun stick is in fact now also the lighter blue along with the rest of the body, the ball joint remains silver, and the plunger once again features the glossy black on the manipulator arm itself. However, the rest of the actual tubing is once again that lighter blue design. Something of which that I couldn't provide within the initial review was a direct comparison to the original release from the Sound Effects Daleks range Wave 2. That was because we were in the middle of a global pandemic, we couldn't really travel anywhere, and I was stranded straight up Newcastle away from Hosty HQ. So here we finally have them side by side on camera, and I'm not going to go through all the details. It's like the 16th part of this series. We've seen many Daleks by this point, and you know what to expect. Of course, you have those colour changes, which I've already mentioned. This one has a silver base, and the only notable difference that is worth mentioning is that the gun on this version is the initial 60s gun with the different sections, and this one is the more regular Dalek gun. The next Dalek of the set is a regular 60s Dalek from the chase, and I absolutely love this Dalek. I just love everything about it, and I think it's a rather underrated variant. I just personally love it. We have a lovely sheen which has been used. It's now lovely monochrome and shiny, so all of the silver sections really do pop compared to some of the previous releases which kind of look a little bit too dark. And then we have a lovely use of colour on the hemispheres. These are ever so slightly darker compared to the original version. And then of course we have the dome light once again being that yellowed domed tint previously taken a look at, and that slimmer black base there at the very bottom. The biggest change that this Dalek sports, which is also seen on History of the Dalek Set 4, is the inclusion of this white midsection, never seen before on any other Dalek released as a part of this series. Again, a few people don't like this. I personally love it. I don't know if it's accurate to the actual story or not, but I think it really nicely splits up the silver. I think it looks very cool. And again, we have the continuation of these 60s Daleks featuring the 1960s gun with a few ridges running around the side. Because I'm nice like that, here is another comparison to the original Chase Dalek released alongside the Mechanoid, as well as the Sound Effects Daleks range Power of the Daleks Dalek. The other change worth talking about is of course the dome lights here on this version. It is that orange tinted design, as well as the discs on the eye stalk. On this initial version, it is the lots of discs all clumped together, as opposed to the space design, which now also sports a lovely lighter blue paint application. Dalek's pupil at the tip of the eye stalk is also now much smaller on this latest version, being a small dot of white paint compared to the much larger seen on the original version. History of the Dalek Set 3 is a lovely addition to the collection, especially if you don't have the original versions, and in particular, I just love this Dalek. I think this is possibly one of the highlights of the B&M range so far in my eyes. I really do love it. Next up we have History of the Daleks Set 4, this time also from a First Doctor story. It is the Daleks Master Plan, featuring a drone Dalek with the flamethrower arm, complete with a lovely orange flame at the very end, originally released within the Enemies of the First Doctor Collector Set, a Forbidden Planet exclusive, accompanied by a Master Plan Supreme Dalek, originally released as a part of the 50th anniversary Toys R Us exclusive Doctor Dalek series. And again, both of these Daleks feature minor paint application changes, because of course they do. So delving straight into that comparison with the original release, again you know exactly what to expect. Those silver sections are now that lovely shiny monochrome finish, very much like the History of the Daleks Set 3, and overall it looks great. There may be an ever so slightly lighter shade of blue which has been used on the hemispheres. Again, the fender at the bottom is that slimmer black design, and at the very top we have the inclusion of the dome lights. On the original version these were tinted orange, these are now tinted yellow, and follow the Power of the Daleks more egg-shaped dome design. We also have the inclusion of the eye stalk. On the original version, again this was stacked with lots of discs. This is now the much more spaced lighter blue design, and then we have the midsection. On this version it's light grey, on this version it is that lovely white. I like this Dalek for similar reasons to the History of the Dalek Set 3. I think the colour scheme looks lovely, and the flame might be an ever so slightly darker shade of orange, but let's face it, only sad people like myself who've been filming this series for at least 3 years by this point actually care about that. Completing the History of the Dalek Set 4, we have the Supreme Dalek. If you have the original version, then again you know exactly what to expect from this release. In fact, if it wasn't for this midsection here being a vibrant white compared to this darker grey seen on the original version, it would be very, very hard to tell the differences, as that is the most notable change. Again, we have the 1960s gun, and the gloss overall of the black that appears to be used on this latest version does seem to be slightly shinier, slightly glossier compared to the more matte black seen on this original version. The hemisphere spheres also seem to be an ever so slightly darker blue compared to the Toys R Us exclusive version, and again this blue is darker compared to that of a regular 1960s Dalek. The silver sections are also that shiny monochrome design compared to the darker silver used on the original version, and then we also have an ever so slight change on the eye stalk as well. On the original Toys R Us version, this is a much darker blue which has been used on the discs, and then we have a lighter blue seen on this latest 2020 version, and again the dome lights are that yellow tinted variation. The history of the Dalek Set 4 wasn't really an essential purchase. This set was either for those fans who missed out on the original versions, which have now gone on to be quite rare, or simply for those collectors who collect every single variant, because the changes that have been made with these Daleks are quite minor compared to that of the original versions, and to be honest, you could have probably easily missed out on this one if you are an occasional action figure collector. But that said, for those of us that did get it, it's an alright variant, just not the most exciting. So now we move on to the 3 packs of the B&M range of later 2020. Starting off on quite familiar ground, which tends to be a theme for these 3 packs, it is of course the Unit 1975 collector set, featuring a re-release of Sergeant Benton and Captain Mike Yates within this set, having previously been released in the Unit 1971 set. However, this time the Brigadier has been replaced with a variant of the 4th Doctor. So previously within this episode we've already covered the movie Daleks from the Jungles of Makkanos collector set, which are highly fought after Daleks that have been wanted for many years, and now we have the 4th Doctor in his Scottish garbs from Terror of the Zygons, again another prototype that we knew existed from many years ago, and now we finally have it for the shelf. And of course, looking back in hindsight, we now also have the 2nd Doctor in fur coat with the Character Options 2nd Doctor and Tardis collector set, and it seems that Character Options are revisiting older territory and now giving the figures that we have wanted for so many years, which is very welcome indeed, but also very exciting and satisfying to finally have these figures for the shelf. It feels that after all of this time, a hole is being filled. I don't quite know what it was by this point, because this is in fact quite an exciting set. However, I don't know if it was just me as a fan or the community as a whole, but I think generally people weren't as excited by this set as I thought that they would be looking back. I think perhaps that we were suffering from action figure fatigue because we had seen quite a lot throughout 2020, plus the situation of the pandemic. It wasn't necessarily the best environment to release action figures in. However, nevertheless, we finally have this figure to add to the shelf. Getting the most unusual figure out of the way first, it is of course the Captain Mike Yates body, however with a moustache plastered over the top, and it is being passed off as a regular unit soldier, and yes, it doesn't really work. It basically just bulks out the set to make it a 3-pack, and it is very odd why they've done this. I never quite got it back in the day. I in fact have this on my shelf within the 7th Doctor era. Due to the camouflage uniform, I kind of pass it off as a unit soldier from Battlefield, but it baffles me because I could have maybe put in a Zygon instead, perhaps, maybe a repaint of that. I'm sure people would like to army build Zygons, or maybe even Harry Sullivan in his blue suit, although not strictly from Terror of the Zygons. It would have gave a variant of Harry that we've not yet had, as it's a figure, and not a particularly brilliant one, but hey, it's there for the shelf if you want Yates with a moustache. On a more positive note, however, we have a 2nd variant of Sergeant Benton, which is always very welcome, and the likeness is superb. I was originally going to say that I love this 2nd variant much more than the original version, simply because we have that camouflage going on, it's a bit more exciting. But that said, both of them are now side by side. I've not done a comparison in a review as of yet, and to be honest, I like them both in their own right. I have some lovely camouflage detailing using different shades of green, as well as the odd burgundy splatter in there as well, and very much like the Unit 1971 set, we do have variation between these pouches and the Yates pouches, just an ever so slightly different shade of green, which is nice, I suppose, for variety. And of course on the side of the arm we also have the little unit ranking, as well as unit on the opposite side as well, an ever so slightly different badge this time for the unit team, which is quite cool. Nothing too exciting on the lower half of the figure, however we do have some paint application changes. Of course there is a different shade of green which has been used, both of which do have a nice wash over the top, again to give the appearance of a one piece of clothing. On this latest version the shoes are a kind of darker brown, however on the original version they are a glossy black. Both of the unit characters do also come packaged with a new variation of gun. This is of course a brand new sculpt compared to the previous Unit 1971 collector set design, which I have previously covered. The Fourth Doctor used as a base within this collector set is of course the one previously seen within the Forbidden Planet Exclusive Genesis of the Daleks and Sontaran Experiment collector sets, which that was later released as a part of the 50th anniversary Genesis of the Daleks Toys R Us exclusive Dr. Dalek 2-pack. It is a very effective base figure, and it works very well, and as we can see within this comparison, there is a striking difference between these two figures. As you can see on the right, we have the colour palette, which has been used on quite a number of the previous releases, and then we have on this 2020 version here a much more vibrant colour palette which has been used. Of course, a most notable change being that the tie is now a lovely darker green as opposed to the burnt orange seen on the original. The waistcoat has also received a number of paint application changes. Arguably it is now more simplified, so you have that yellow base with the blue checkers over the top. Here we have various splatters and different lines to kind of recreate the texture of the original waistcoat, which admittedly is a lot more detailed. And then we also have the suggestion of the Season 12 jacket underneath as well, which again is a much more vibrant burgundy. There is also a subtle paint application change in the duffel coat overall. As you can see on the 2020 version, this is now a lighter paint application compared to the unusual browny purple seen on the original. I think it's probably a very rare occurrence within this series where one of the highlight paint applications is within the trousers. This is usually quite boring. However, we have this lovely texture which has been used, a lovely stippled, speckled design, really creating this lovely form of texture on the trousers, which would usually simply be a block colour of grey. This is a really lovely and welcome paint application change, and I really do like it. I think it definitely adds something to this figure the previous releases haven't had. Another welcome inclusion is of course the brand new sculpt for the scarf, never seen before. This has a base of red with this lovely design added over the top to kind of replicate tartan in miniature. Of course we have this long piece draping down at the front, and this also goes onto the back as well, which is really lovely and it works very well. Head sculpt is absolutely brilliant. It undeniably looks like Tom Baker. There is lots of great details, in particular within the face structure, and it is lovely after all of these years to have a new sculpt for Tom Baker, given especially that he was one of the very first figures that we've seen within the classic action figure range. I love the way the hair comes around the side of the face. A nice wash has been applied over the top of this to really bring out those details. I love the way it sits under the hat, and we even have a little tassel coming around the back as well, where the top of the tam o' shanter drips down at the back of his head. However, a reoccurring theme with the B&M series and Character Options figures as a whole is that the paint that is used over the top of this sculpt does drown out some of those details. We have some rather thick paint which has been used, which really drowns out the detail of the wrinkles and the creases within the face, making it look rather simple. But in particular for this figure, I think it's the paint application of the eyes. They're simply too bulging and big, making the figure look very caricature and very odd. The Unit 1975 set, I think I can recall, did split opinion, especially in the likeness to Tom Baker. I don't mind it, I think it works well, and to be honest, I'm just happy to have this figure on the shelf after so many years. The variant of Sergeant Benton is very welcome, and arguably I think some people prefer this to the original, and the unit soldier, well, he's there, I suppose. He bulks it out for numbers. He's been invited to the party simply to make it a bit more crowded, and overall, I can't exactly complain. At the end of the day, we've got Tom O'Shanter Tom after all of these years, and it's a joy to have it. The second free pack released in the later half of 2020 is the Companions of the Third and Fourth Doctor. This is the final free pack that we'll be taking a look at as a part of this wave, as the third free pack was indeed the Companions of the 13th Doctor. We all knew we will be getting further variants of Sarah Jane and the two Romanas, simply because the head sculpt exists and naturally Character Options are going to want to use it as much as possible in order to get their money's worth. First up we have Sarah Jane, this time round from the Third Doctor era story, The Monster of Peladon. Now this figure uses exactly the same torso sculpt to that of the original release, and the bottom half of the figure this time round has been revised to feature the Sarah Jane Adventures sculpt, including the trousers and the booted leg. It works well to make an interesting variant. I think one of my critiques of this figure in 2020 was that it was nice, I suppose, however not particularly that interesting. The colour palette doesn't particularly capture the imagination. Within the story, from what I can remember, Sarah Jane has a woolly jumper. This can't of course be done here because the jacket is fastened, however we do get a slight suggestion of it just underneath the neck piece. The rest of the jacket is simply a glossy brown, and the same can be said for the back as well. We have some nice sculpting details, and of course we have this lighter brown running up the side there as well. But for the legs, they continue that not particularly too inspired colour scheme. It's kind of an unusual purpley brown, and then we have those purpley shoes there at the very bottom, are a very light purpley pink kind of colour. They're very unusual, kind of a dirty purple. One of the reoccurring benefits of this collector set is that we get to revisit these already excellent sculpts, however see a slight revision within the paint application, because the original genesis of the Daleks version of Sarah is lovely. The sculpt, as I mentioned, is already superb. However, the paint application which has been used is a bit unusual. The lips are a bit too pink, and then the eyebrows are very highly raised. I've seen lots of very odd looking Sarah Janes, to say the least, and the eyes are very bulging, very unusual. She looks absolutely terrified, to be quite honest, but I still love the figure because she did have that terrified expression quite a lot throughout Genesis of the Daleks anyway. But this version is much more natural looking. She looks a lot more well, to say the least. We have still that rather exaggerated eye expression to the extent she still does look a little bit caricature. However, the eyebrows and the lips are much more natural, look a lot better. One thing I would say is that it would have been nice to maybe have a wash on the hair, simply because this is a lovely sculpt, but we don't really get to appreciate it that much because there isn't much of a wash on there to bring out those strands and additional curls and details. So if we get another version of Sarah, it would be nice to maybe see that included. In fact, my personal favourite thing about having this second variant of Sarah Jane, it means that we can have two versions of Sarah on the shelf within their different eras, alongside both the third and fourth Doctors, and to see another variant of Sarah in the future. And I think that she is one of those companions where if they did have the money to do the Hand of Fear Andy Pandy sculpt, I think it will be worth it, because I think people will most certainly purchase it, especially if it came with the Eldrad hand. The second figure of the set is of course Romana 1, as portrayed by Mary Tam, and I think for me and many others is most certainly the highlight of the set. A much better figure this time round, with a much more TV accurate costume. Of course this uses the Sarah Jane body once again as a base, so we just have these rather blank looking legs which have been painted black along the boots, and the same for the arms as well, and a bit of the torso to kind of represent that jumpsuit that she wears within the episode, and a PVC piece has been added over the top. And just as a reminder, here is a comparison with the original version of Romana, and of course that rather ugly looking pink costume. It works okay, it meant that we got the sculpt, so as a result I can't really complain, but this second version is undeniably a lot better. Wraparound piece does feature a lot of nice material details, including a few creases and wrinkles. This has been simply sculpted in a rather red looking plastic, and the same can be said for the back as well, with a few creases and wrinkles in this padded shoulder section. And of course we have this black band running around the middle, as well as a zipper at the very front. It's a simplistic costume, and as a result works very well. And then we have the likeness to Mary Tam, which is another strength of this collector set, as once more the sculpt has been slightly revised along with the paint application, and it is much better this time round. A lovely detail on the face. We have a lovely skin tone which has been used, and the eyes have been wonderfully painted, lots of sharp details within them, including the eye whites and the little iris in the middle. And I love the way that we have a swish of the eyeliner running around the top, represented using a very precise black paint application. I've been trying to work out what they've done with this sculpt to kind of make it look better. The paint application is one thing, as the original version has this rather unusual tanned appearance accompanied with these very purple lips. I believe they've also adjusted the hair sculpt. I believe that we now have an overhang on the top of the hair, meaning that it comes down the face a lot more, as the original version has a very large forehead, to say the least. It's either that or they've actually tweaked the head sculpt as well, generally making the head sit on the hairpiece much more effectively. So yeah, received a revision this time round, a much nicer, more healthier sculpt. It is in fact quite glossy. However, we have a lighter brown which has been used, and again the sculpting is incredible. The details are lovely, lots of lovely curls, definitely representing the volume of Mary Tam's hair within the TV show. And again, she looks absolutely superb alongside the fourth Doctor. All we need now is a key to time accessory. To conclude the set, we have Lala Ward as Romana 2, once again a second variation, seeing once more the use of that absolutely superb head sculpt, which undeniably looks like Lala Ward. Now, the difficult thing for this figure, at least in my eyes, is that I absolutely adore the Destiny of the Daleks costume, therefore the original release is very, very hard to beat. A colour palette has been completely revised to look slightly like the costume as seen throughout the Horns of Nimon. Thinking back, one of the things that I didn't like about this figure when I first got it was the lack in detail on the coat. I think that a wash over the top, maybe a lighter shade of red or something like that, just to make the coat seem less of a block colour, would have brought this figure to life a bit more. Maybe even a little trim around the side of the lapels, regardless of if it's TV accurate or not. One thing that this figure does do right is that when we peel back the jacket, we have this absolutely lovely design featuring the cardigan that she wears throughout the story, a lovely cream colour, and then we also have the rather bulky looking white shirt underneath. Again, all of this detailing, including the ripples, the buttons, and the different material sections, has all been printed on, but this works much better compared to that of the original version of Romana, which you can probably recall from earlier on in this video, where it just looks like an absolute disaster underneath it. The version is a lot better, lots of sharp details, and then of course you have the cream trousers in there as well, and the black boots at the very bottom. As for the head sculpt, this is a very similar situation to that of Sarah Jane, where the head sculpt itself is perfect. It is one of the best head sculpts that Character Options have done in a long time, and some of those thick details seen on the original version have now been thankfully removed. So most notably, of course, you have the eyelashes, and that thick black line around the eyes has now been made much more subtle. The same can be said for the eyelashes, as well as the eyebrows and mouth. Too over the top, unlike the original version, which has a little bit of a habit of looking caricature. Love the paint application on this second version, but that said, I still love the original just as much. It's one of my personal favourite figures in quite a number of years anyway. Revision to the hair, much more natural on this second version. I think the original looks very slapdash, very over the top, so we have a very vibrant yellowy colour which has been used with this darker wash. Similar for this second version, but the overall base colour is much darker, more dirtier in its blonde design. It can in particular be seen on the roots of the hair, as well as around to the back. It seems to be much more faded, more natural, and overall I think it looks in appearance a lot better. So yes, this version, although the costume isn't as good, I think it's definitely okay. If it does become more possible in the future, it will be lovely to see revisions of these sculpts again, maybe even have costumes that don't rely on pre-existing sculpts, and we can have some of the more iconic designs for these companions, the likes of the unusual outfit that she wears within the Leisure Hive, or maybe even the Sharda outfit. I think that would be really cool, but as always, she looks great alongside Tom Baker. The companions of the third and fourth Doctor set was undeniably a great second opportunity to add these companions to the shelf, and the novelty hasn't worn off. It is brilliant to have these fourth Doctor companions for this figure collection finally, after so many years of wanting them. The head sculpts are brilliant, and it's great to see that some improvements have been made from their original first releases. The costumes can be a bit hit and miss. I do quite like Horns of Nimon Romana. The Mary Tam is undeniably the highlight of the set, and the Sarah Jane figure is okay, I suppose. She looks excellent alongside John Pertwee. Well, it's been a while since we've taken a look at a classic series TARDIS exterior box, and when I say that, I mean it's been about 5 minutes. The final set for the B&M Exclusive line of September to October 2020 is the second version of the 5th Doctor's TARDIS, this time round from the Season 19 story, The Visitation. I must admit, when this was initially announced, I did think, what is the point, because the changes which have been made are very minor to the previous B&M Exclusive 5th Doctor TARDIS, but now I've got this set, I love it. It's one of my favourite 5th Doctor TARDISes ever. But for those of you that get figures occasionally, I can certainly see why you would miss out on this one. So delving right in there with a comparison to the original 5th Doctor TARDIS from the caves of Androzani. In short, this one looks knackered and this one looks pretty pristine, and both of them I absolutely love. They've both got character, and they both have little differences between them that in my eyes kind of justify a second purchase as a collector. I've reviewed both of these TARDISes separately in their run reviews. I've gone into all the ins and outs of the signage and the details, so if you're interested by these boxes, take a look at the individual reviews that I have done, as both of them are technically recent products in the grand scale of things. So naturally the TARDIS blue on this box is ever so slightly lighter compared to this one, which is a much darker blue, a much more glossier blue in fact. And then overall a wash has been applied to this box here, which again is a very muddied wash, very thick in its design. It's spread throughout the entirety of the box itself. However, this latest Visitation version does indeed have a wash over the top, which does go around to all of the sides. However, it does fade in much easier. Then of course we have the signage at the top, again the blue background with the very thick white lettering, very bold. This is pretty much identical. We have the inclusion of the stacked roof and the lantern at the very top, the same sculpt as always. And then we have the signage here at the front, which again is a lighter blue compared to that of the Caves of Androzani release, as well as being a bit more readable because we don't have lots of mud smeared on the front. Again, of course, this is non-electronic, all the doors do open, battery compartment at the very back, and then we have this muddied wash there at the very bottom as well. This is absent on this version, as you can see, due to this being a pristine box, and this one has lots of mud splattered, so it's personal preference as to which one you like more. Of course, the windows are ever so slightly more yellowed too. As I say, I love both of them in their own right. They're both really lovely boxes, and this one will look great alongside the 4th, 5th and 6th Doctors. Continuing the theme of comparing both the different versions of the B&M Exclusive 5th Doctor TARDISes, the two 5th Doctors that have been released alongside these TARDISes do have quite a lot of stark changes, as you can quite obviously see, in keeping kind of with a similar theme to the TARDISes, where we have a more pristine version of the 5th Doctor and a more knackered version of the 5th Doctor, of course all muddied up, which we have already taken a look at. This one is in fact very, very similar to the San Diego Comic Con exclusive that was released alongside the Anthony Ainley Master many years ago, and of course the Hatted Head was then re-released as a part of the 5th Doctor and Dalek from Resurrection of the Daleks 50th anniversary exclusive collector set. So again, if you're somebody who missed out on that figure, then this is a great opportunity to have a 5th Doctor Hatted Head to add to your shelf. Again, to be honest, very much like the 5th Doctor TARDIS, this 5th Doctor figure really did up my expectations when I first got it. I absolutely love it. I think it is a lovely representation of the 5th Doctor from his early stories. We do have a few variations within the costume, including a button being painted here that isn't painted here, as well as the paint application overall on the checkers on the jumper, of course being slightly different, more thicker in fact on this latest 2020 version. The wonderful trademark celery is of course present on the lapel, and the coat has also been given an ever so slight revision. This one is a different shade of cream. We have the lovely piping design around the side. The red is much more toned down, a more orangey red compared to the earlier versions being a more stark red. And then we have the Panama hat there at the very top as well. Again, a slight revision within the paint application, a more yellowy design with the red band there at the very top as well. And as for the trousers, again, some nice revisions. We have a cream based colour which has been used and some nice sharp detailing with the stripes. We of course have that lovely green colour and the red in there as well. Considering that this is a B&M exclusive, overall the stripes are very neat. There's only a few minor issues where stripes have almost rubbed away, which is very unusual. It's been like that since I got it. Whites of the shoes, again, these are a solid white as opposed to these ones here having a little bit of a wash over the top. Of course, the likeness to Peter Davison is the same as the vast majority of 5th Doctor figures, and in particular, in fact, for this variant, I really do like it. I think the paint application overall is really sharp, really detailed. I love the way the eyes have been done, and that nice subtle paint application on the lips. And again, the same lovely details on the hair with that wash over the top. I can't wait to be able to display this 5th Doctor alongside his companions, Nyssa, Tegan and Adric, because they will eventually be released. I'm sure they will. We've seen Sarah Jane, we've seen the two Romanas, so surely by this point anything is possible. I'm hoping that the 5th Doctor companions will be along the way shortly. The thing that I really love about this set personally is that I really underestimated it. When I found out it was coming out, I wasn't that bothered because I thought they really couldn't make it that much different compared to the previous 5th Doctor TARDIS, and admittedly the changes which have been made are technically quite minor, but it makes for a very satisfying box to go on the shelf, and visually one of probably my personal favourite designs of all time. This memory behind purchasing this set is really nice as well. It was a winter's day, however the weather wasn't that awful. I thought that I was going to need to go trekking around the country to try and find these sets. It turned out that my local B&M had them all in, and it was really satisfying to be able to go in for once, actually enjoy purchasing them as opposed to tracking them down, and then being able to go back and simply enjoy having these products. It was overall a nice day, a nice memory is attached to it. I think that is the good thing about collecting action figures, and it's one of those sets that kind of reminded me of collecting as a child and having that excited feeling of being able to open these products and be really excited to have them and own them. And as we near very close to the end of this series, I think it makes for a very good time to reflect, as that is what action figure collecting is all about. Not just purchasing the products, not just having them on a shelf, but also the fact that we can look back and look at the figures that we've had on our shelves for 10 years, maybe even more, and actually be able to remember the day of purchasing those figures and the emotions at the time, the emotions and excitement of the announcement, and being able to say that throughout our lives we've been able to collect these, and we've kind of gone on that journey of collecting these characters and monsters, and kind of the excitement that's accompanied that as well. And I suppose that that is what this series has been all about since its very beginning, reflecting over those past memories and the joys of collecting Doctor Who action figures. Well, Doctor Who did of course all start as a mild curiosity in a junkyard, and I think that it is very fitting that the final release of 2020, another B&M exclusive of the later months of the year between November and December, is indeed the Coal Hill School collector set from Remembrance of the Daleks, featuring Ace as portrayed by Sophie Aldred alongside an Imperial Dalek. And it is indeed a very fitting collector set to end off, because as we near the end of 2020, that does of course also mean the end of Doctor Who, the classic series action figures a history, as I've decided to end off this series on 2020 and quite possibly pick up this series in a few years, covering the releases that have taken place since. So yes, I suppose in a way it marks the end of this series, but also both the beginning of Doctor Who itself. So I suppose for the final time, let's take a look at the action figures within this set, starting off with Ace. Of course, originally released as a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive from Remembrance of the Daleks, this figure does of course share a lot of similarity to that of the original release one. But that said, this B&M exclusive does feature a lot of worthy paint application changes, which certainly justify a second purchase, especially if you have that original version, because the paint application on the face is so much better. So taking a closer look at the costume, the packet itself is just as impressive as the original release. Of course, this is littered with lots of novelties and badges from the likes of Blue Peter and NASA, and many more references in there as well. And this has been really impressively done for the scale. Really impressed that this has been done on a B&M exclusive release. When I heard that this set was coming out, I was really worried that they were going to simplify the coat. Also, you have lots of them going around to the sides of the arm as well. In the very centre, we also have the inclusion of Ace's wonderful music shirt with some really nice details on of different instruments and musical notes, with these lovely black lines running around the side. Of course, this is the same on the original release as well, although I would dare say that some of these details are in fact much better on this latest version, and also the colouring which has been used on the later version is in fact much nicer, more vibrant. As we flip around to the back, we have Ace's backpack. This is the same to the original version, so you have the grey panels and the black panels, and the back of this does actually pop off so you can put things inside. But this figure doesn't come with any Nitro 9, it doesn't come with the cricket bat, so the original SDCC exclusive version does still offer some incentive. Of course, this is also removable to reveal at the back of the costume the Ace lettering. Again, this has been really sharply detailed. I do indeed have two Aces because I bought this set twice. For the second figure of the set, of course, the Imperial Dalek. And then as we move down to the bottom of the figure, really not too much to talk about. We have the inclusion of the skirt, which has your usual material detailing, lots of ripples, lots of creases, looking very authentic. And then we also have the black tights and the glossy boots there at the very bottom. And then we move up to the face, and I never quite understood what happened to the original version of Ace and why it ended up looking like, well, that. And it's very unusual because the SDCC exclusives normally tend to have a higher standard of detail, but that did tend to be lost on this version of Ace, and I don't just have a bad one. A lot of them did indeed look like this. So if you have that original version, the B&M exclusive is indeed a vast improvement, which is a very rare situation indeed. Sometimes you expect the paint detailing to decrease on the re-releases, but this is very much the opposite case. So lots of lovely detailing on this sculpt. You have some lovely paint application. We have on the side of the eyes, including the eye whites, the lips and the eyebrows are all very sharp, not any paint leak on these or anything like that. She's not oddly looking over to the side, unlike the original version. And then of course we have the inclusion of the little earring in there as well with a light blue paint application. All of the hair has been stretched back, of course, into the ponytail, which leads around to the back of the head. Again, some lovely braided detailing on this. Overall, it's very impressive indeed, and definitely worth that second purchase. And this set doesn't stop there. Even though Ace has a backpack, she also comes with the additional accessory of a rocket launcher, originally seen within the SDCC Remembrance of the Daleks figure set. So it's great to see that even in these most recent episodes of this series, we are already seeing a progression within the B&M exclusive action figures, going from collector sets that actually actively avoided to use accessories to sets the likes of this, which tend to be throwing them in more often, even in some cases having multiple accessories. And that can also be seen within the 2021 releases, the likes of the Sensorites, actually featuring brand new accessories which have been sculpted especially for the set. Very much like how the original version has, we have this little rocket launcher tip at the very end, can actually be detached from the accessory overall to give the impression that she has launched the rocket, but overall the detailing is very similar to that of the original. And finally, to complete not only this set, but also this series as a whole, it is only fitting that we conclude on a Dalek, probably the 15th billionth Dalek variant that we've seen as a part of this series already. And again, another fitting convenience is that it is my personal favourite colour scheme to ever feature on a Dalek. It is, of course, the lovely cream and gold Imperial Dalek. Now, I do in fact have this set twice because I wanted to army build some of the white and gold Daleks because they look superb together. So these Daleks do in fact feature, once again, say it with me people, some ever slight different paint application changes to some of the previous Imperial Dalek releases. You know what, since it is the final box set of this series, I'm going to absolutely go to town on the comparison and compare this Dalek to not one, but two Imperial Dalek variations. Don't they look brilliant together? So we have the two B&M 2020 variations on either end, then we have the original release of the Imperial Dalek released alongside the 7th Doctor in cream jacket, and then we have the Forbidden Planet exclusive Remembrance of the Daleks 4-pack version of the Dalek, which again features some differences. So overall, the paint application on the 2020 version is very, very similar. We have that lovely cream which has been used, which might be ever so slightly darker compared to that of some of the previous releases, although it's very hard to tell to see if that is a different shade or if the figures have naturally just aged a little bit over time. So zooming in to take a look at release 1 and 2, because there is some progression in the sculpt here. Compared to the original release, this is the normal length manipulator arm with these little gouges taken out of the side. On the second release we have a new variation of manipulator arm which was used, which was ever so slightly smaller, more flexible as well, to the extent that I was quite worried that it was actually going to snap. And again, this is in fact an ever so slightly different sculpt which has been used. The latest 2020 version does indeed adopt this design, however it does appear to be ever so slightly stronger, and to be honest I actually think that the sculpt is also a little bit sharper. The ball joints are now also a rather nice bronzy colour compared to the darker colours seen on the original Forbidden Planet exclusive releases. Slats of the Imperial Dalek do also feature some variation. Now on the 50th anniversary Renegade Dalek they decided to tweak this sculpt in order to feature a little bit of mesh texturing in between the golden slats. So as you can see on the original version, this is just a standard blank piece. However, on this latest 2020 version, that texturing has now been used here, which overall I think makes the slats look a little bit more interesting. Very much like the history of the Daleks 60s Daleks, this Imperial Dalek does also feature a little bit of a shiny tweak where we have on the slats, as well as the gun manipulator arm and the hemispheres on the skirt, we have a slightly shinier bronze which has been used, which overall really makes this Dalek pop compared to some of the previous releases and looks absolutely glorious. The top of the Dalek does also continue this much more shinier bronze design. We have the inclusion of the uniquely Imperial Dalek ear dome lights at the very top, which as per usual have been sculpted in a clear plastic with a golden highlight at the very top, and of course the midsection also features your usual Imperial Dalek detailing. Now we do have a slight revision to that of the eye stalk. Now once again a little bit of a history lesson. On the first release we had this rather long looking eye stalk which doesn't look too different from any of your other classic series Daleks, with the blue pupil there at the very end. Flash forward to the Remembrance of the Daleks 4-pack with this rather stumpy little eye stalk design, again with the individual discs and of course the blue highlight there at the very end of the pupil. A rather small eye stalk has been used. However, then we're going to throw in the other Imperial Dalek, of course the Necklace Dalek, Revelation of the Daleks, and this features a rather stumpy eye stalk once again, however with a black highlight at the very end and a black pupil. Now from what I can tell on this latest version of the Imperial Dalek in 2020, what they've basically done is adopt this sculpt from Revelation of the Daleks, giving it a remembrance of the Daleks colour scheme, including of course the main socket being gold along with the actual discs themselves, and then the rest of the eye stalk is white, and then most notably, unlike any other Imperial Dalek released to date, the ending pupil is of course black as opposed to the usual blue. The Coal Hill School Collector Set without a doubt ended off the B&M Exclusive range of 2020 on a high. I personally love the Imperial Daleks, as I mentioned, and therefore I'm very happy to see that we've got an Imperial Dalek this early on within the B&M Exclusive series, as opposed to waiting the entirety of the history of the Daleks series before we get to the later half of the 1980s. If you missed out on the initial Ace, this also is a perfect set to get that figure, and the beauty is if you simply want the Ace, there is lots of them, I do believe, on eBay these days after a lot of people bulk buying this set in order to army build the Imperial Daleks and having lots of aces left over as a result. So overall, a really brilliant set, and to be honest, rather unusually, I didn't recall this one having too much excitement back when it was released, and I think that that links into what I was mentioning earlier within this series, about possibly within 2020, due to the circumstances of the global pandemic, COVID-19, perhaps people were not as focused on Doctor Who action figures, and I felt that perhaps the line was oversaturated at that point with lots of variants. However, I think by this point in 2021, at the current time of filming, the excitement for this series is most certainly building once more, with brand new exciting characters being added to the collection from the 1960s with the Sensorites and Vord, as well as brand new companions being added to the shelf, and of course, nothing changes within the classic series action figure line. As always, we get lots of variants of Doctors, lots of variants of Daleks, and you guessed it, lots of variants of Tardises. When I first started out this series, it acted as a way for me to talk about Doctor Who action figures and merchandise while studying at university away from Hosty HQ. Originally, when this series started, I was in second year. I'm now in fourth year studying for a Masters, and it's safe to say that it has been quite a journey of nostalgia, and I hope you have enjoyed coming on this journey with me. I hope that seeing these figures has awakened old memories for you that you completely forgot you had, be it opening these figures on Christmas Day, weekend shopping trips in the sun and rain, or maybe even after school, and of course most recently trekking around endless stores of B&M in hope to find the sets from the latest wave and not the shelf warmers from the previous year. If the most recent sets are anything to go by, there is still lots of exciting releases to come, and who knows, maybe when I'm a bit older, I might revisit this series and reminisce on that rather unusual time that we were living in a global pandemic whilst collecting Doctor Who action figures. Excitement at the releases the likes of the Sensorites and the Vord, and maybe even eventually the release of a Yeti. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed it, and that has been Doctor Who, the classic series action figures, a history. Well then, what now? New series action figures? Never say never.